When Advent comes, especially as I grow older, I guess, I'm always astounded at the passing of time and how it seems to fly by. And here tomorrow we will have Christmas Eve service, a time when we celebrate that most sacred event that the Lord, our Creator, would come into the world to be with us as a fellow human being. And of course had so much to teach us and to show us. Well, as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, so we're the day before this event, and I was just wondering, what were Mary and Joseph doing the day before? Now, she is 9 months pregnant. They're making this journey to Bethlehem, and you know, of course, at first I think, what a stressful thing that would be to be 9 months pregnant and traveling. But then I thought, maybe I don't think enough about Joseph. You know, when we looked at the genealogy, it was because Joseph is a part of the line of David. This is why they're going to Bethlehem, because this is where his roots are. This is what brings us to Bethlehem, where we have this sacred story. Now so in a way, he's coming back to his roots, right? And this morning I heard Joyce and Grandpa talking about going home again, or what it would be like. I kind of overheard that a little bit. To go home again, or what does it feel like? You know, if you can imagine any time being gone and then coming back home, what that feeling is like. Sure, Tara is thinking about, about that, or I was thinking about Roy moving back. What does that feeling like? And there is something about going home or returning to where you grew up anyway, that it feels different. I'm not sure I can describe it. What any other place would feel. It's the terrain, it's the color of the land, it's, of course, things that are familiar, the buildings, the places, the people. So I was just thinking, Joseph was probably feeling kind of joyful in some sense to return back to his roots. Now the reason they are called back is because of this census. And this is Caesar Augustus wanting a census, wanting everybody to register, the whole Roman Empire. And this is kind of one of those times when history really meets up with our story in the Bible. I looked it up. Caesar Augustus, he was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar. And during his reign, 3 times, he did call for a census. And he thought it was one of his many great achievements. And it's actually listed outside of his mausoleum. It was put in bronze. He thought this was 8th on his list of wonderful things that he did during his reign, that he had these censuses happen. And 3 times he did this. I think it was for a purpose to see how the empire was growing, and also for taxes, but I don't know. But so this is why we're called back to Bethlehem. Now Bethlehem, I was wishing, it was one of those things, this could be a trip. I wish we could take a trip to Bethlehem to see where Jesus was born. What I read about it is that it's about only 6 miles, I think I read 6 miles away from Jerusalem. Very close. So you can imagine it's not just a place out in the wilderness somewhere, but they would have had a lot of knowledge about cultures, traditions, religions. It would have been, I think I saw the word melting pot, as a way of describing the place. And Bethlehem, this is not the first time we read of Bethlehem. Bethlehem has been showing up since Genesis. It's the place where Rachel is buried. It is where the book of Ruth mostly takes place. It is where we find David, who is to be king. It goes Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, if you remember the kings. And then there's a prophecy in Micah that out of Jerusalem, a king will rise up who will bring peace. So Bethlehem this is not new territory here. And today, if we were to go, I believe what I read was that it would be about 60,000, the population. It's a mix, Muslim, Christian, and they have one of the oldest sort of sacred Christian churches there that was built over where they think the actual nativity happened. And it's kind of a cave, and it was built in the 300s by Constantine, and part of it was destroyed and it was rebuilt in the 500s, and it remains as this most wonderful pilgrimage site. So we can't go there, but we can learn a little bit about it this morning. And the thing that I remember most, the thing that strikes me the most, is that, it wasn't in our reading, but Bethlehem is known as the house of bread. So this is where my mind has been, the house of bread. And what does that mean to us? What I think is so interesting is that bread is this nourishing thing. It's been this staple at the dinner table for, some believe, like 10,000 years. People have been making bread. Now, we had our World Communion Sunday not too long ago, and we brought in some different kinds of grains or bread. So if you think not just the kind of bread that we make for communion, but, you know, tortillas, or whether it's wonton wraps, or whether it's pita bread, whatever it is, bread in some way is kind of this foundational element in a meal, and has been for a long time. So what does it mean? That Jesus, right away, is linking himself to this image of bread. And not only is it bread, he's in a manger, right? A manger is not actually a kind of bed we would choose, right? It's actually a place where we put food. So what does it mean that right away the Lord links himself with this image of nourishing us? You know, I think that is the most, I love that image. He's born, house of bread in the manger. And this is not the only time that Jesus will relate himself with bread, right? I mean, what comes to mind? Our communion, definitely. You know, and when we say those words, when he had that Last Supper, he said very specifically, he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he said, "Take, eat, this is my body." If you think about the miracle of the loaves and the fish, he had 5 loaves of bread to feed 5,000 people. That's all he had. And the disciples are like, what are we going to do? Send him home. Maybe we can't feed him. But what is really feeding us as people? It's the Lord's presence. And he makes that miracle happen, and there are actually leftovers when it's done, and he says, "Bring them to me. None shall be wasted." And then we have this event happening. Well, some of you, of course, maybe your minds went to the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And whatever comes to mind for you there when you say that. And then what we have is this interesting part in the Gospel of John where the people are like remembering this great miracle. This is something that has stayed with them, this manna in the desert. And they're saying, this is what happened to our ancestors. What are you going to show us as a sign? And he turns that completely around and he says, that was not Moses, that was God giving you food from heaven. And I am here now, and I am the living bread. I am the living bread. So what does that mean for us? In the desert, the manna, it came every morning. It came for 40 years. It tasted like honey, and it was tiny. It was on the ground, and they didn't know what it was. That was their first thing. What is it? That's what manna means. What is it? And if you think about it, when Jesus is connecting himself with that story, it's like he was saying that's a prophecy of him. The bread comes down out of heaven. And if you think about it, what did a lot of people say about Jesus? Who are you? What is this you're doing? Right? In the same kind of way, they didn't understand, they didn't know. And if you think about the Lord blessing us every morning with new blessings and new strength for the day. And that the Israelites were grumbling, of course. And after a certain amount of time, they were tired of the wind. And I was just thinking, how often don't we take it for granted? The blessings that we have in life, that every day God provides us with what we need to get through the day. Every day God is with us with love. The teachings are there for us every day. And what were the instructions? Everyone is to collect some every day for what they needed. And if they tried to hoard it, for those who tried to take more, what would happen is worms would get into it. They couldn't actually keep it. You know, it's to be gathered every day. Nothing is to be wasted. The bread came back after the miracle. Nothing was to be wasted. And he says in there, and he says, I am the living bread. He said, I am here. I closed my Bible. He said, in that verse in John, he said, so that none, it was like he was saying, so none shall be wasted. I'm coming for everyone. God came to nourish our better nature. The people were not starving in the same way as those in the desert when Jesus came. I mean, physically, we know he didn't come to just hand out food. He came to nourish their better nature. And he came with beautiful teachings. And I know, if we hear often things that Jesus taught, love one another, forgive one another, and it's almost commonplace, isn't it? But does that make it any easier to live by? What if you were hearing it for the very first time? And what would that feel like? That would feel like something satisfying our soul. And God designed us with a hunger for something more. The reason I brought us back to this image of Bethlehem as a place of bread is because I have often turned to this book, Religion and Life by Julian Smith. He was a minister long ago in our church, and he had this beautiful chapter about how the great love came. And he wrote about this connection between what was happening in Exodus and what Jesus says. And I just wanted to just read a little portion of this. He says, because if we see the people were hungering for that, it always says the crowds were around him, or even the disciples, they spent their whole life. They didn't just make it something where they kind of listened to him for a while and then left and then came back and left. They were with him. And he said it had to do with everything. This is what he was giving them for food. They must not be covetous. They must not exalt themselves. They must not bear each other malice. They must not be idlers. They must do unto others as they would be done by. They must be patient under trial. They must be forgiving under persecution. They must not harbor impure thoughts or desires. They must be just and upright, loving one another. Why? Because they were in the presence of perfect life. And it sounds like a lot of rules. It sounds like, oh my gosh, I have all these things to do. But it is because it's love. This is what a life of love looks like. And he says, why do we even call it religion? Why do we separate what we're learning here from the rest of our life? He said, if we are not kind, if we are not just, if we are not sympathetic, if we're not treating each other as brother and sister and so on, he says, what right have we to think that the great love has come to us? Let us take into our week and into our thoughts this image of God as bread, that God is offering something so satisfying and so nourishing to our spirit. And may we remember that call to gather it every day. Every day, let us do something kind. Let us do something unselfish. Let us do something in a spirit of forgiveness and compassion. And may we grow and carry the Lord's Spirit with us.